So in Game 1 of these Western Conference Finals, Kawhi Leonard and the San Antonio Spurs were kicking the Warriors' ass, to put it bluntly. It was looking like Game 1 was going to go to them, and we were going to have a very interesting conference finals as San Antonio's offensive execution, perimeter defense, as well as having one of the best players in the league. The Warriors, they had a tough time against it. But then, as we all know, unfortunately, Kawhi Leonard went down, and that was all she wrote for that one. But if we can look at San Antonio's situation right now with their salaries and some of the options they have going into the offseason, could the Spurs find themselves in the same situation next year? And hopefully with Kawhi Leonard not getting hurt, they would actually have a chance of beating the Warriors. I really hope so, man, because based on the first two games of the NBA Finals, I'm starting to get scared that the Warriors are just going to run the NBA for the next, 6 seasons. So here's hoping that the Spurs can actually give them some resistance. But let's just talk about them first and foremost. I mean, you got to start with Kawhi Leonard. He's the top dude. He's the guy who has made Greg Popovich adjust his system a bit. There definitely is still a lot of ball movement and player movement and all that, but there are those times now when Kawhi just gets the ball in an isolation or in a simple screen and roll or a post-up, and, I mean, he's great for them. My question about Kawhi is if he's going to go the next level with his playmaking, because he still has those games where he only gets 3 assists, and, I mean, I'm not expecting him to jump up to 7 or 8 a game, but a solid 4 or 5 just to go on top of everything else he does offensively, and of course defensively, as he's the best perimeter defender in the NBA. But he's good. Now LaMarcus Aldridge, I think he was getting some crap for his performances in the playoffs. I mean, I'm fine with the dude. He's a number 2 option, and if Kawhi Leonard doesn't get injured, then he fits into that really well. He can still put up a solid 15 to 20 points a game, and I think Aldridge is fine as your number 2 option behind Kawhi Leonard. Post-up guy. I think some people remember his time with the Blazers when they were making the playoffs and how he would have these games of going off for 35, 40 points and just being automatic for mid-range. I would say those days are over for LA. Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with LaMarcus Aldridge. Danny Green, one of the more underrated players in the NBA, just because I think everyone recognizes that he's a good defender, but I think Danny Green is one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. I'm talking one of the 10 best, maybe even one of the 6 or 7 best in the league. And then he's pretty decent on offense as well for what you ask him to do. Now, Pau Gasol, I mean, I gotta admit, I didn't think he'd be able to survive in the playoffs. And sure, against the Warriors was one thing, but once Kawhi went down, I mean, who really cares? They found a defensive formula against Houston where he wasn't a liability for them, so maybe they could figure it out with him moving forward. I mean, he can still be an offensive option. His shooting has really improved. At times, he can still be a post-up player and finish around the rim. Gasol might be a fine 20-minute player at this point. Now, Tony Parker's interesting. He's definitely on the decline. He's got one more year left, and I'm sure they would love to have just a more athletic or a better defensive or a better shooting point guard, but you don't really have another option besides TP. Well, there is Patty Mills, and we're going to talk about him. Now, we also need to mention their free agent situation. They have a couple of guys who really help out their depth who are going to be free agents. One of them is Jonathan Simmons, who, to me, was a key piece in how they were able to almost beat the Warriors in Game 1. And they probably would have if Kawhi didn't go down. He's a good defensive player. And I think at this point, if you're looking at the Warriors as your real rival, then you can use guys who can play defense there. Now, I like Dwayne Dedmon a lot as a big man who can defend, but they didn't really play him that much. He only played 8 minutes a game in the playoffs. So as a result, I wouldn't mind if they just let him go. I mean, I would love for my favorite team to pick him up, I'll tell you that. And then there's Patty Mills. I think Patty Mills is definitely a better player than Tony Parker at this point because of the shooting he provides, whether it's off ball, providing spacing for Kawhi Leonard, LaMarcus Aldridge, and their entire offense to flow. But he's also got some okay playmaking abilities, and he can create his own shot occasionally. So which one of these three do they bring back? There is actually a way that they could potentially bring back both Patty Mills and Jonathan Simmons. Because to me, Jonathan Simmons is probably worth about $7 or $8 million on the open market. And before I go back into Patty Mills, there is DeJounte Murray, who seems like he can be something. Do you really let Patty Mills go for him? I mean, I think he's a few years away from really being like a guy who can contribute for you. But Patty Mills, I mean, it's going to depend on how much money someone else throws at him. Would I re-sign him for like 10, 11, 12 million? Yes, I definitely would. And if you could keep him and Simmons, that would just be fantastic. And the thing is that Tony Parker, as well as Pau Gasol, those guys' contracts are up at the end of next season. That's $30 million coming off the board after this year. So you could actually be willing to give Patty Mills and Jonathan Simmons just a little bit more because a lot of that money is going to be coming back. So, I mean, if you could bring Patty Mills and Jonathan Simmons back and it wouldn't kill you going up against the luxury tax, that would be great. But of course, we also need to talk about Chris Paul because that has been a rumor that's been gaining a lot of traction lately. Here's the thing. For them to get Chris Paul, they would have to trade Tony Parker and his contract, which means you would have to attach a first-round pick to it. That, combined with Dwayne Dedmon leaving, David Lee leaving, and allowing Patty Mills and Jonathan Simmons to walk. Well, you don't have to make them walk. You could potentially re-sign them, but then you're risking it. If Chris Paul takes too long to make a decision, Patty Mills and Jonathan Simmons could have signed to someone else. It's a big risk, but if you allow everyone to go and you trade TP, you have around $26 million in salary cap. If Chris Paul was willing to take a little bit of a pay cut to go to a winning team, then it could happen. But again, you are risking losing a lot of your depth to the point where, yeah, the starting lineup would definitely get better, but, I mean, you lose Patty Mills and Jonathan Simmons, that's really hurting your bench, which, I mean, that might be too much to lose against the Warriors. The more conservative option would be, if you don't have to break the bank too much to re-sign Mills and Simmons, you could actually afford your mid-level exception. You could throw it at someone like a Patrick Patterson, who's a power forward who definitely struggled with his jumper this season for the Raptors, but he was still pretty good defensively. Would his shooting be able to just be better on San Antonio? Maybe. Another option would be Luke Richard Mbah-a-Moute of the Clippers. I mean, the Clips would definitely be inclined to bring him back, but he's another guy who could defend a few positions for you off the bench. And I think at this point, these are the type of guys the Spurs need to be looking for. Guys who can actually survive against the Warriors defensively. This is the mid-level we're talking about. I mean, in a perfect world, you could get some knockdown shooters who can also play defense. You're not really going to get that for $8 million a season. Another one's PJ Tucker, who's a damn good defensive player who, at times, has been a good shooter. Another would be Thabo Sefolosha, who's still one of the better defensive players in the NBA. Again, Chris Paul would be great, but it's a big risk if you could actually even get him, and you could be losing a lot of your depth in the process. But unfortunately, man, Kawhi, if he doesn't go down, I mean, I don't know if they beat the Warriors, but I think it's safe to say they would have given him a hell of a series. So I just really hope the Spurs can be that one team the Warriors need to worry about, because if they're not, then, I mean, you want competition in the NBA, and these are the one guys right now who can really give it.